He always smiled at the elderly janitor, but he never knew what the man had done in the war. He always smiled. Rain or shine, exhausted or late, Daniel made sure to nod and smile at the old janitor every morning. But on the day the janitor didn't smile back, everything changed. Daniel McCall was 26, full of ambition, full of noise, full of the arrogance that comes with youth. He worked on the 15th floor of a gleaming corporate building in downtown Chicago, a place where people walked fast and never looked down. But Daniel had a habit. He noticed people, especially the quiet ones. The janitor's name was Mr. Whitaker. He was old. Not just old, but the kind of old that made you wonder how his knees still held him upright after waxing 30,000 square feet of tile every night. His face was a roadmap of creases, each one holding a story no one had asked about. His uniform was clean but faded, shoes polished but cracked, movement slow but precise. He never spoke much. Just nodded when spoken to, gave a half smile when greeted. Daniel always smiled at him. Out of respect? Maybe. Pity? He hated that idea. No more like instinct. There was something about Mr. Whitaker. Something that made Daniel's usual flurry of self-importance dim just a little as he passed. Until one morning, when Mr. Whitaker didn't return the smile. He didn't nod. He just kept walking, his mop dragging behind him like a limp arm, shoulders slumped with a heaviness that didn't seem entirely physical. It bothered Daniel all day. He missed meetings, spilled his coffee. He even snapped at his assistant, something he never did. And that night, as he left the office, he waited in the lobby near the elevators, watching the hall where the janitor usually worked. He didn't show. The next morning, Daniel stopped the receptionist. "Hey, do you know if Mr. Whitaker's okay?" The janitor. She looked up from her screen. "Whitaker. He still works here." Daniel blinked. "He's been here every day since I started." She shrugged. "I thought he retired. Or maybe got moved to the night shift." Daniel frowned. "Can you check?" She gave him a look. "You're really asking me to look up a janitor's schedule?" He hesitated, then turned. Never mind. But something inside him had shifted. That missing smile. That silent limp. That sudden absence. He couldn't let it go. Over lunch, Daniel sat alone at his desk and Googled Chicago janitor Whitaker. Nothing. Then elderly janitor Chicago Whitaker. Still nothing useful. Until he added one word. Veteran. And there it was. An article from the Tribune, dated 1981. Headline: War hero returns home, chooses quiet life over parade. Daniel stared. The black and white photo showed a younger version of the man he'd passed every day standing beside a damaged helicopter, arms crossed, face serious. He clicked the article. Staff Sergeant Samuel Whitaker, age 37, returned home this week after serving 3 tours overseas. Credited with saving 14 men during an ambush in Quang Tri Province, Whitaker refused medals or public honors. "I just want a job," he said, "and peace." Daniel leaned back, stunned. 14 lives? A staff sergeant? Why was no one talking about this? And more importantly, why was he still mopping floors in a downtown high-rise 44 years later? That evening, Daniel waited again in the lobby. And this time, Mr. Whitaker came. Slow, silent, back to his routine. Daniel approached. "Sir, can I talk to you?" The old man paused, turned. His eyes clouded. Tire met Daniel's. "I know who you are," Daniel said. "I read about you." Whitaker stared for a long moment, then said, voice rough like gravel, "Not much to read." "You saved 14 people." He shrugged. "Didn't save everyone." Daniel stepped closer. "Why this job? Why keep working?" Whitaker looked away. "Some debts you pay with your life. Some take longer." Daniel didn't understand, but he didn't ask more. Not yet. He started staying late, sometimes just to catch a glimpse, sometimes to ask questions. Most nights, they didn't speak. But Daniel walked with him down hallways, across silent lobbies, through memories that hung in the air like dust. Eventually, Whitaker told stories. Not war stories. Life stories. A daughter he hadn't seen in 30 years. A brother who died in the same war. A mother who waited every day at the mailbox, hoping he wouldn't come back in a box. Daniel listened. One night, Whitaker said, "They called us heroes. Gave us a uniform, then a broom. Told us to sweep up what was left." Daniel stayed silent. The next morning, he printed the Tribune article. Taped it in the break room. That afternoon, someone tore it down. "Not appropriate," his manager said. "This is a professional environment." Daniel nodded. Then he made 50 more copies. left them in elevators, stuck one on the executive fridge. They kept disappearing. So he printed more, until someone finally asked, "Who is this guy?" Daniel answered, "A man who served this country more than most of us ever will." The questions kept coming, from secretaries and interns at first, then middle managers. Then, eventually, a senior VP pulled Daniel aside in the restroom. "You really think it's a good idea to stir all this up?" Daniel looked him dead in the eye. "You mean the truth?" The VP frowned. "It's not about truth. It's about tone, morale. You're glorifying something painful. The guy clearly doesn't want the attention." Daniel didn't reply. He started spending his weekends trying to learn more about Samuel Whitaker. The military records were mostly sealed, but Daniel found a few old veterans forums online, obscure ones, barely active. On one of them, a post from a user named EagleMedic71 said, "If it wasn't for S. Whitaker, I'd be a photo on someone's mantle. Quiet bastard, but brave. We lost radio contact. He dragged me a mile out under fire. Carried me with a bullet in his own leg. Never even talked about it after." Daniel read it 5 times. Screenshot it. Saved it. Printed it. Then he showed it to Mr. Whitaker. The old man barely looked. "I remember him," Whitaker said after a long pause. "Told him to stay down." Idiot stood up. "You saved him. He never should have been there." Daniel shook his head. "But he was. And you did." Silence. Then, so quietly Daniel barely caught it, Whitaker said, "We were all just kids." A week later, Daniel asked if Whitaker wanted to get coffee after his shift. The old man looked surprised. "Coffee? Yeah. Or tea. Or whatever. My treat." Whitaker hesitated. "I don't sit with people." "Well," Daniel smiled. "Maybe just this once." They went to a corner diner, the kind that smelled like burnt toast and coffee grounds soaked into the wallpaper. Whitaker ordered black coffee. Daniel got hot chocolatey hated coffee, but didn't say so. "I'm not interesting, you know," Whitaker said. "You are to me." Whitaker gave him a long look, then finally asked, "Why?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Because no one else noticed you, and you kept showing up." Whitaker gave a slight nod, then looked out the window. The glass reflected his tired face, soft and hollow in the pale light. "When I came home, everything was noise. People clapping, asking questions, shaking my hand. You didn't like it? It felt wrong. I had friends who never came back. Brothers. The ones who died don't get questions. Or claps. And you thought, what? That you didn't deserve to be thanked." Whitaker's voice cracked. "I was just lucky. That's all. Lucky to come back. Unlucky to remember it all." Daniel didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. They sat there in silence for several minutes. 2 generations separated by a half-century and a war, quietly sharing a table in a diner that time forgot. The next day, Daniel had an idea. He went to HR. "I want to nominate someone." "For what?" they asked. "The recognition wall. That little plaque thing in the lobby. Employee of the month." HR rolled their eyes. "Seriously?" "Yes. Mr. Whitaker." There was a long pause. "He's janitorial staff. That award's mostly for corporate." "Why?" It's always been that way." Daniel leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time that changes." 2 weeks later, the new plaque was mounted, right next to the elevator. A photo of Mr. Whitaker not smiling, but strong. Underneath, the words, "Samuel Whitaker. Building Services. Employee of the Month. Veteran. Hero. Quiet guardian." Daniel watched people pause at it, read it, whisper, nod. Whitaker said nothing. Until one night. Daniel was locking up late. The building mostly empty. He turned the corner toward the elevator and there he was. Mr. Whitaker. Just staring at the plaque. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I don't want applause." "I didn't give you applause," Daniel said softly. "I gave you a name." Whitaker's voice was hoarse. "They told us, back then, not talk about it. Not to bring it home. They were wrong." Finally, the old man turned. And for the first time, Daniel saw him smile, not a half smile, not a polite nod, but a real, full smile. Soft and painful and grateful. "Thank you, son." But the smile didn't last long. Because a week later, Mr. Whitaker didn't show up again. Daniel waited in the lobby, the elevators, the cafeteria. He asked the front desk, the security guard, the janitorial lead. Nothing. Finally, he called HR. Do you have an emergency contact for Samuel Whitaker? They hesitated. Then, his daughter. But they haven't spoken in years. She listed a number once. Let me see. They gave it to him. He called. No answer. Then again. Voicemail. He left a message. Hi, I'm Daniel. I work with your father. He hasn't been in for a few days, and I'm worried. Please call me back. The next day, the daughter called. He had a stroke, she said bluntly. At home. Alone. Daniel's throat tightened. Is he okay? They said he might not speak again. His right side's weak. They're not sure if he'll walk. Where is he? Cook County Rehab. Daniel thanked her. Then he went. The hospital smelled like bleach and age. Daniel found the room. There he was. Samuel Whitaker. Hooked to machines. One eye open. Blank. A soft beep echoing in the air. Daniel stood there a long time before sitting down beside him. Hey, he whispered. It's me. Daniel. The guy who always smiled at you. He chuckled, even though it wasn't funny. You didn't come in last week. Made the whole building feel colder. The old man blinked slowly. His mouth twitched, whether from pain or memory. Daniel couldn't tell. I read everything I could find about you, Daniel continued. And it still wasn't enough. Silence. So Daniel pulled out a folder. Inside printouts. Articles. Comments. Messages. A letter from a man in Florida who said Whitaker once pulled him from a chopper crash. A photo from Vietnam, where a blurry young man with square shoulders stood among ruins. Daniel placed the folder on the bed. In case you ever want to remember, he said. He came every week. Sometimes Whitaker was awake. Sometimes not. Sometimes he seemed to recognize him. Sometimes he stared through him. Daniel brought music. Letters. Books. He read aloud. Brought photos from the office. Told him which coworkers missed him. What floors were dirty. Who spilled coffee on the third floor again. He did it because he wanted to. But mostly because no one else did. One day, 6 weeks later, the daughter called. He said your name today. Daniel froze. Really? Yes. I walked in and he looked up and said, Daniel, the boy who smiles. Daniel's chest ached. Can I see him? Yes. But there's something else. He's remembering more. About the war. Things he hadn't spoken in years. I think you gave him back a piece of something he buried. At the hospital, Mr. Whitaker was propped up in bed, his face thinner, but alert. You came, he said, voice ragged. Always. They talked for hours. This time about the war. The mission. The night he crawled across a field of bodies to get to his team. The way the moonlight hit the trees. The feel of blood soaking through his uniform. The names of every man he lost. He cried. Daniel held his hand. And he cried too. Because grief, after so many years, doesn't fade. It waits. Patiently. Until someone helps carry it. The next time Daniel visited, Mr. Whitaker was out of bed, sitting in a wheelchair by the window. You look stronger, Daniel said. I feel older, Whitaker muttered, but there was a spark in his eye. They watched the city together for a while. The streetlights flickered on. Cars rushed below like tiny pulses of light in a body too big to understand. Do you regret it? Daniel asked suddenly. Whitaker didn't move. The war, Daniel clarified. Still no answer. Then, softly, I regret not saving more. But not the fight. Daniel nodded. He wasn't sure if he understood, but he didn't argue. Silence stretched between them again, comforting now, not heavy. There's something I want to do, Daniel said. If you'll let me. Whitaker turned his head. What's that? I want to write your story. The whole thing. What you told me. What others said about you. Everything. I think people need to know. The old man closed his eyes. You'd have to be honest, he whispered. Even about the bad parts. I will be. And you'd have to listen. Really listen. I have been, Daniel said. And I will. Whitaker didn't answer. But that evening, as Daniel stood to leave, the old man reached out and gently touched his hand. Okay. Daniel spent the next 2 months compiling the story. He recorded conversations, took notes, dug through archives and forums. He visited other veterans, tracked down families of the men Whitaker had served with. He learned the names of men who died beside him. Men Whitaker never forgot. Men who never got plaques or medals or stories of their own. He called it The Quiet Guardian, The Life of Samuel Whitaker. And when it was done, he printed out 20 copies and brought one to the hospital. Whitaker flipped through the pages slowly. He didn't say a word, just stared. Then, finally, closed it and whispered, You got it right. Word spread. The piece made it into a local veterans newsletter, then a few blogs. Then a Chicago radio station invited Daniel to speak about it. Then the city called. They wanted to honor Samuel Whitaker at the annual Veterans Day ceremony. Daniel asked him. Whitaker refused at first. I don't need applause. You already told me that, Daniel said, smiling. But this time, it's not for you. It's for them, the ones who didn't come home. That made the old man pause. And he agreed. On the day of the ceremony, a crisp wind cut through the city. Daniel stood behind Mr. Whitaker's wheelchair as they rolled him up to the podium in Millennium Park. The crowd was quiet, waiting. A military brass band had just finished playing taps. Veterans in uniform stood at attention. Children held tiny flags. Daniel whispered in Whitaker's ear, "Are you ready?" Whitaker nodded. He gripped the sides of the chair, struggled, then pushed himself to his feet. Slowly, trembling. But he stood. The crowd gasped. He leaned forward and spoke into the microphone, voice rough but steady. "I am not a hero," he began. "I just outlived mine." Silence. "I cleaned floors for 40 years after I came home. No medals on my chest. No parades. I didn't want any. But I want you to remember the boys who didn't make it back. The ones who never got to grow old. The ones who still scream in my sleep." His voice broke. He paused, then cleared his throat. "Someone once asked me why I never talked about the war. I told them, because no one ever asked." He looked out at the sea of faces. "Thank you for asking." When he sat back down, the crowd rose to their feet, not in celebration, but in reverence. After the ceremony, a man in a suit approached Daniel. He was with the VA. "We want to feature Mr. Whitaker in a national campaign. We think his story could change how people see aging veterans." Daniel asked Whitaker. He said no. Daniel pressed. "You told your story once. Now maybe it can do something bigger." Whitaker eventually relented, but only under one condition. No edits. You don't polish it. You don't make it sound prettier than it was. You keep the blood in. They agreed. The campaign went viral. Photos of Mr. Whitaker stoic, proud, tire spread across the internet. The janitor who was a hero became the headline. But Daniel hated that. So he changed it every time he spoke publicly. He called it what it truly was. The hero who cleaned so we wouldn't see the dirt. One day, Daniel found a package on his desk. Inside, an old military patch. Faded, burned at the edges, framed in a thin wooden box. A note, written in shaky handwriting. "You gave me back my name. This belonged to the man I was. You can carry it now. Sam." Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he wept. 3 months later, Mr. Whitaker passed away in his sleep. No pain, no machines, just silence and peace. The funeral was small at his request, but powerful. Daniel spoke. The daughter read a letter her father had written her before the stroke. Old men in uniforms saluted the casket. A young trumpet player from a local school played taps, his cheeks red, his hands shaking. Daniel placed the framed patch on the casket and whispered, "You mattered. You always did." Back at the office, the plaque in the lobby remained. But Daniel added one more thing. A quote, carved into the wall beneath it. "Some men clean up messes. Some men carry them. Sam Whitaker did both." Every morning, employees passed it. Most paused. Some didn't. But none of them could say they didn't know who he was anymore. And every day, Daniel smiled at the plaque. Just like he used to smile at the man who had once stood there quiet, unseen, and carrying the weight of 1,000 memories no one had ever thought to ask about. Until someone finally did. The weeks after the funeral passed slowly. Daniel kept waking up early, like he had somewhere urgent to be, only to remember there was no coffee to bring, no chair to wheel into sunlight, no dry joke waiting in that familiar voice. At the office, people asked him how he was holding up. He always answered with a polite "fine," but the truth sat like a stone behind his ribs. The building had changed. The floors were still clean, but the silence felt different now, less peaceful, more hollow, as if the place itself had lost something. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. No return address. The handwriting was tight, shaky, and old. Inside was a single page. "Dear Daniel, I served with your Mr. Whitaker. Korea, not Vietnam. He never told you that, did he? We were medics, field rats, mostly. I saw him carry men through artillery fire like it was Sunday morning. I saw him patch up enemies too. He once gave morphine to a dying North Korean boy. The kid was maybe 16. I don't know what Whitaker told you, but I want you to know, whatever you wrote, whatever you said about him, it still won't be enough. He was braver than most men who ever wore a flag, and he never needed credit. He just needed peace. Thank you for giving him a little of that before he left. Corporal L. Shriver read. Daniel read the letter 3 times. Then he called the VA, asked if they had records of a Corporal Shriver. They did. The man was 96, living in a small care home 2 hours away. Daniel drove there the next day. Shriver was small, frail, but his eyes were sharp. When Daniel entered the room and introduced himself, the old man sat up straighter. You're the one who wrote about Sam. Daniel nodded. He changed my life. Shriver smiled faintly. He changed a lot of lives, even when he didn't try to. They spoke for over 2 hours. Shriver told him stories, unfiltered ones, of gunfire and blood, but also of quiet compassion, of how Whitaker once stayed behind in enemy territory to make sure a wounded soldier got carried out, of how, when the war ended, Whitaker refused every medal offered to him. He said medals didn't make dead men live again. Daniel asked why Whitaker never told anyone. Shriver shrugged. Guilt. Shame. Some people come home and need to talk. Others come home and can't. He was the second kind. On the way home, Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He let the silence tell its own story. Back in the city, something strange started happening. Emails, letters, comments online. Veterans young and old reached out after reading the campaign or hearing the radio story. Some shared names of forgotten soldiers. Some told their children's names for the first time. Some said thank you. One woman wrote, My father served with Sam in 71. He never told us anything about the war until he read your piece. Then he cried, told us about the night Sam dragged him out of a ditch, even after being shot. He said Sam saved his body and his soul. Thank you for making him speak. Daniel printed the letter and pinned it beside his desk. He started collecting the stories. Dozens. Then hundreds. He built a website, thechequiatones.org, a place where people could submit stories of veterans who had never told theirs. He called it a digital wall of memory. Within 2 months, the site had over 5,000 submissions. And then, something unexpected happened. He received a message from the Smithsonian. They were building a new exhibit, Unsung Heroes, the voices we never heard. They wanted Samuel Whitaker's story to be the centerpiece. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Are you sure? He asked the curator. He wouldn't have wanted. He didn't want applause, the woman replied. But this isn't applause. This is remembrance. They requested artifacts as uniform, the patch, photos, letters. Daniel visited the daughter again. She had a small box of things, old medals he'd hidden in a drawer, a knife, a photo of him with men whose names had been lost to time, a letter he wrote after his discharge but never sent. She handed it all over. I used to be angry at him, she said. He was always so distant. Now I understand. He was carrying things too heavy to speak about, and he didn't want to pass them to us. Daniel promised to honor him properly. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the center of the Smithsonian's newest wing. Crowds moved slowly past glass displays. Children held their parents' hands. Old veterans leaned on canes and stared at the photos like they were portals. At the center stood a life-size photo of Mr. Whitaker, in his janitor uniform, mop in hand, with tired eyes and a soft, weary smile. Below it, the quote, I was just lucky. Unlucky to remember it all. Samuel Whitaker. To the side, a short plaque told his story quietly, truthfully. And beside it, a screen played Daniel's recorded voice reading excerpts from The Quiet Guardian. He watched a woman wipe away tears as she listened. Watched a man place his hand on the glass like he knew Whitaker himself. Then he stepped outside. That night, Daniel returned to the building where it all began. The office had mostly emptied out. Just the hum of late-night lights and the familiar creak of elevators. He walked to the janitor's closet. It was different now, cleaner, maybe, but it still held the smell of pine cleaner and quiet labor. He opened the door. On the inside, someone had taped up a small photo of Whitaker. Underneath it, written in marker. We remember. Daniel stood there for a long time. Then he sat down on the old bench inside and cried, not out of grief, but out of gratitude. Later that month, Daniel gave a TED Talk. He opened with a photo of Whitaker sweeping the hallway, expression unreadable. This is what a hero looked like, he said. Then he paused. He worked beside me for almost 2 years. I smiled at him every day, and I never asked who he really was. Until one day, I did. The audience leaned forward, and what I learned changed my entire life. He told them about the war, the mob, the hospital, the stories, the plaque, the silence. He ended with this. Sometimes we walk past greatness every single day. We overlook it because it's quiet, or old, or dressed in overalls. But the janitor in your hallway may have once saved lives. The crossing guard at your child's school might have survived 3 wars. And every time we fail to ask, we miss a chance to remember. Standing ovation. But all Daniel could think of was the small nod Mr. Whitaker might have given, and the quiet smile he might have offered after. Years passed. Daniel became a speaker, a storyteller, a teacher. But he always carried that same framed patch in his bag wherever he went. Every time someone asked him where it came from, he answered the same way. That, he said, belonged to a man who cleaned more than floors. He cleaned history. He cleaned guilt. He cleaned silence. And then, if they had time, he told them everything. Not long after the TED Talk, Daniel received an invitation from a small high school in Iowa. The email read, "Our students read your story about Mr. Whitaker. We'd be honored if you'd come speak to our senior class. Many of them are from military families. Some feel invisible. Your story made them feel seen." Daniel agreed. He had never been to Iowa before. He rented a car, drove through flat farmlands, and arrived in a town where the population barely exceeded 2,000. In the gymnasium, the air smelled like old rubber and popcorn. The bleachers were filled with teens trying to look disinterested, but their eyes followed him as he walked to the center. He didn't bring a slideshow, just a worn copy of The Quiet Guardian. "I want to tell you about a man who was invisible for most of his life," he began. He told them about the mob, the silence, the hospital, the war. And then he looked up, and his voice softened. "Some of you may be carrying things too heavy to speak about. Maybe your dad doesn't talk about Iraq, or your mom still flinches when a car backfires. Maybe you feel like nobody sees you at all." The room went still. "I'm telling you now, you matter. Even when you're quiet. Even when you think no one is looking. Someone is." When he finished, no one clapped right away, but students slowly stood. Some hugged him after. One boy pressed a crumpled drawing into his hand, a sketch of an old man in a janitor's uniform, standing tall. Daniel carried the drawing in his wallet for years. Months later, thechequiatones.org began expanding globally. Stories poured in from the UK, from Japan, from Argentina, from Kenya. One submission came from a woman in Berlin. "My grandfather cleaned buildings for 40 years in silence. We thought he was bitter. But last year, we found his journals. He rescued children during the war. He had families. He never told anyone. I wish we had asked." Daniel partnered with a team of volunteers and translators to launch a new branch of the site, Unsung Worldwide. Each week, they featured a story in a different language. Each story honored the forgotten. And at the top of every page, in bold white letters on black, was the quote, "We remember." One day, Daniel found himself walking down a hallway in Washington, D.C. this time, not as a visitor. A senator had read about the quiet ones and introduced a bill in Congress, the Invisible Valor Act. It aimed to fund mental health support, recognition services, and storytelling grants for aging veterans. Daniel was asked to testify in support. He wore a dark suit, brought nothing but the framed patch and a single photo of Mr. Whitaker. When it was his turn to speak, he held up the photo. "This is Samuel Whitaker. He cleaned office floors for decades. Most people walked past him, smiled, maybe, but no one asked. Until I did." He told the story again. But this time, when he finished, he added something new. "I used to think we honored heroes with parades and medals. But sometimes, the greatest honor we can give is to ask, listen, and remember." That's all Sam wanted. That's what they all want. Not applause. Not pity. Just not to be forgotten. The bill passed with overwhelming support, and Daniel sent a copy of the signed act to Whitaker's daughter. She framed it and hung it above her kitchen table. Daniel still returned to the janitor's closet sometimes. The bench was a little more worn now. The mop had been replaced, but the photo on the inside of the door remained, and someone had added another note beneath it. He walked quietly so others could walk free. One morning, as Daniel sat there reflecting, the building's new janitor, an older woman with sharp eyes and tired hands, entered. She paused, seeing him. "You knew Mr. Whitaker?" she asked. Daniel nodded. She smiled. "He trained me when I started. Didn't say much, but he always checked the back exits before leaving. Said he didn't trust alarms. Said people deserved a second way out." Daniel laughed softly. "That sounds like him." She looked at the photo on the wall. "He was the only person who ever asked why I limped. I told him I fell off a roof in Iraq. He nodded and gave me a better mop." Daniel blinked. "You served?" She nodded. He stood. "I'm glad he asked. I almost didn't." She shrugged. "Well, you're asking now." And just like that, a new story began. Eventually, Daniel published a second book. This one was called The People We Walk Past. It wasn't just about veterans. It was about janitors, cooks, gardeners, bus driver men, and women who lived through things the world never asked about. One chapter was entirely dedicated to letters sent in by people whose parents never spoke of their past until it was too late. It was a national bestseller. In the preface, Daniel wrote, "This book isn't about war. It's about worth, about memory, about the quiet souls who walk among us carrying stories we never thought to ask about. Let this book be your permission to begin the conversation." One snowy evening, years later, Daniel walked past a mural painted across a brick wall in the middle of Chicago's South Side. It stopped him cold. It was Whitaker mop in one hand, a field medic's patch on the other arm, eyes full of storms and peace. Beneath it, graffiti style in silver paint. He never asked to be remembered, but we remember him anyway. Daniel took a photo of the mural, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel grief. He felt legacy. A kind of peace, like old memories finding their way home. 5 years had passed. Daniel was now a father. His daughter, Ellie, was 3. She loved puzzles, blueberries, and bedtime stories. But more than anything, she loved sitting on his lap and hearing about the man with the mop. "That's Mr. Whitaker," Daniel would say, showing her the framed photo. "He was kind and quiet, and he saved a lot of people before you or I were even born." "Was he a soldier?" she'd ask. "He was more than that. He was a protector, a healer." Ellie would blink, nod solemnly, and press the photo to her chest like it was magic. To Daniel, it was. It reminded him of the simplest truth. If we carry someone's story, they never really die. In early spring, Daniel was invited to speak at Arlington National Cemetery. They were unveiling a new section of the memorial gardens dedicated to unrecognized veterans, those whose service went undocumented, unnamed, or unknown for decades. There were no grand flags, no trumpets. Just a sea of white stones, each with a name newly remembered. One of them read, Samuel Whitaker, Field Medic, Korea. He never asked to be remembered, but we remember him anyway. Daniel stood before the crowd, many elderly, some in wheelchairs, some in uniforms that no longer fit, but were worn with pride. He took a deep breath. "I once walked past greatness every day without knowing it, and I almost never asked who he really was." He told them, one final time, about the janitor who became a friend, about the war he never spoke of, the pain he never shared, the quiet he never demanded to be broken. "But I did ask," Daniel said, "and that made all the difference." He finished by inviting everyone in the audience to do the Samito, ask the quiet ones in their lives. The grandparents, the uncles, the neighbors, the people who seem ordinary until you listen. When he stepped away from the podium, a woman in uniform saluted the stone. And Daniel, without thinking, did the same. That night, sitting alone in his hotel room, Daniel opened an email. The subject line was simple: "I knew him too." Inside was a scanned photo. For soldiers in fatigues, covered in mud, grinning. Whitaker was in the middle, arms slung over his comrade's shoulders, alive in a way Daniel had never seen. Below it, a message. "I was with him the night he saved those boys. He stayed behind. He could have run, but he didn't. He always said, if I can bring one more home, it's worth it." I never forgot that. Daniel printed the photo, framed it beside the original one of Whitaker with his mop. 2 sides of the same man. And both were heroes. As the years went on, the site grew into something far bigger than Daniel ever imagined. The Quiet Ones Foundation funded oral history projects across the country. High school students interviewed elderly neighbors. College campuses hosted Silent Hero nights where students listened to veterans, nurses, refugees, and survivors tell the stories they'd never told before. One of the most visited videos on the Foundation's site was still the TED Talk. But a close second was a short documentary titled The Man in the Hallway, a retelling of Whitaker's life, narrated by Daniel, with clips of the Smithsonian exhibit, testimonies from fellow soldiers, and soft piano behind his words. It was used in classrooms, shared on Memorial Day, even aired on PBS. And at the very end, in white letters over a black screen. Ask them. Listen. Remember. On Daniel's 50th birthday, Ellie, now 17, handed him a thick binder. He opened it to find dozens of pages typed interviews, photos, letters. I started a chapter of The Quiet Ones at school, she said, cheeks flushed. We called it the Lunch Table Project. Every Wednesday, we sit with someone alone in the cafeteria and ask them about their lives. Daniel turned the pages. There were stories of kids with immigrant parents, of quiet teens who had survived trauma, of janitors, cooks, teachers, all remembered, all written with care. One entry caught his eye. Mrs. Callahan, 83 years old, substitute teacher, widowed. Her husband died in Korea. She never remarried. I still make coffee for two, she told us. Some ghosts are gentle. They keep you warm at night. Daniel couldn't stop the tears. His daughter's little Ellie was carrying the torch now. Mr. Whitaker's story wasn't just living through Daniel. It was multiplying. One summer, Daniel returned to the building where it had all begun. The lobby had been remodeled. New tile, new lighting. But the janitor's closet still stood in the same place. He asked for a moment alone. The new manager, a young man in his 20s, nodded respectfully. Inside, the photo still hung, faded, but untouched. Beneath it, someone had left a folded paper. Daniel opened it. In pencil, barely legible. I served too. No one knows. Thank you for helping me believe I matter. A friend. He sat on the bench. The air smelled the same. Pine, dust, a hint of old coffee. And in that quiet, he whispered aloud. Thank you, Sam. The final chapter of The People We Walk Past ended like this. If you've read this far, thank you. But more importantly, I hope you've done more than read. I hope you've looked up from this page and asked someone something real, something forgotten, something buried beneath years of silence. Because someone in your building, your bus stop, your grocery liney is holding a story that will never be told unless you ask. And if you ask, maybe you'll discover, as I did, that some heroes don't wear medals. Some just wear janitor uniforms, walk with a limp, or smile a little softer when the world grows loud. You may be the only one who ever hears their story, but if you listen, you make them eternal. Be the one who asks. Be the one who remembers. 15 years later, Ellie Whitaker Moore stood in front of a university classroom, a projector lighting her face. She was a professor, now history and memory studies. Behind her glowed a title slide. Legacy Through Silence, the Power of Unspoken Lives. In her hand, she held an old, laminated photo of a man with a mop and a weathered face. My father told me this story every year on my birthday, she said to the room. And every year, I understood it differently. The students leaned in. She smiled, just a little. This man wasn't famous, but he changed the world, because someone took the time to listen. She paused. And now so will you. Somewhere, in a small home, a great-grandchild will one day point at a dusty photo and ask, who is that? And someone, maybe Ellie, maybe her children, will say, that was Mr. Whitaker. He was a janitor, a healer, a soldier, a quiet man. And thanks to one person asking one question, the world never forgot him. And they'll smile, because that's how memory works. Not in headlines, but in hearts. And thanks to Daniel, and everyone who dared to ask. The quiet ones were quiet no more.